Good day, children. This is a book I wrote about 2 years ago. It's called Lily and Amelia Visit Mrs. Mable on the Magical MoonEarth. And there is the Magical MoonEarth and Lily and Amelia. Lily is the taller of the two. Chapter 1. Once upon a time, there lived a magical unicorn by the name of Sunflower, rightly called because of the unusual sunflower pattern on her coat and her golden flowing mane. She was a very special unicorn and could run with the wind and fly high into the sky. One day, she went to visit Mrs. Mable on the Magical MoonEarth and was never seen again. That was until she miraculously appeared in the garden of Amelia and Lily's house. Amelia stared wide-eyed. "What was that?" she said, looking at her older sister, who rushed to the bedroom window. "You're never going to believe this." Amelia ran to the window. Looking out, she screeched, "It's a unicorn! A unicorn!" Jumping up and down with excitement, she ran to the door, down the stairs, and outside into the garden. Sunflower shook her mane, and sprinkles of golden dust danced in the air. And that is Sunflower. Lily stood by her little sister's side, taking her hand, saying, "Don't go too close, Amelia. It might be an angry unicorn. We have to be very careful." To their astonishment, the unicorn spoke. "Darlings, I am a lot of things, but angry is not one of them. Now, do hurry and climb aboard my back," she said, kneeling down. The girls looked at one another, stunned, when the unicorn spoke again. "Do hurry, time is pressed," she said. The girls shyly climbed aboard, and before they knew it, were flying high into the sky, holding on tight to Sunflower's golden mane. Amelia chuckled. "This is fantastic." Lily held on tight to her little sister, positioned in front. "Yeah, Mum's never going to believe this. I can't wait to tell her." They flew higher and higher into the sky when suddenly there was a flash of light and they were inside a fluffy white cloud. Lily felt a little frightened. "What's happening?" she shouted. Sunflower turned her head backwards. "Not to worry, we are in a special cloud." Amelia shouted, Where are we going?" Sunflower smiled. "My darlings, we are going to the Magical MoonEarth. Mrs. Mable is expecting you." Lily looked surprised. "Who is Mrs. Mable?" she asked. Sunflower looked straight ahead. "You will soon find out, my darlings," she said as she flew out of the cloud and headed towards a castle in the distance. Amelia pointed. "Look, Lily, there's a castle." She could hardly contain her excitement as they approached. Nanny wore her usual floral apron, waving as they came to land on the lawn. Sunflower knelt down and a footman helped the girls to dismount. Nanny rushed forward. "My dears, how lovely it is to meet you," handing the girls a coat each. "You'll need to put these on as Father Whitebeard is coming and he usually brings the snow with him," she smiled. "So it's going to get quite nippy." And there is the castle and Nanny. Amelia put her little coat on, asking, "Who is Father Whitebeard?" Nanny helped to button her coat. "Father Whitebeard, my dears, is from the North Pole. I think you know him as Father Christmas." Amelia jumped up and down, waving her arms, looking at her big sister, saying, "Lily, Father Christmas is coming." Lily clapped her hands, looking at Nanny, saying, "This is amazing." Then she began to pat her arms, thinking, "This can't be real," before asking, "Are we dreaming?" looking at her wide-eyed. Nanny chuckled. "Oh, my dears, you are awake, I can assure you that. Now come this way, Mrs. Mable is expecting you. She's in the stables, tending to our new arrival." The girls followed Nanny and were stunned when one of the fairiettes flew by in a hurry. Amelia screeched, It's a fairy! A real fairy, Lily!" Her little face lit up with the brightest smile. Lily held her hand. "I know, Amelia. This is a magical place where the fairies live. I wonder what we're going to see next," she said as they followed Nanny towards the stables. Chapter 2. Nanny quietly opened the creaking door. "Quickly, my dears, come inside. We don't want to let the cold in." The girls stepped inside as Nanny called, "Mrs. Mable, the little ones have arrived." Facing the girls, "Come this way." They heard a voice call, "Nanny, I'm in stable 30. Do be quiet as you enter." Then they heard little wee, woo, wee sounds. Amelia looked at her sister, whispering, "What was that?" as Nanny opened the small stable door where Mrs. Mable gestured them inside, saying, "Shh." The girls were speechless as they gazed upon a baby unicorn who was making the cutest little wee sounds, shaking its little head with its dinky unicorn horn shining bright. Mrs. Mable stood up, retrieved her cane from the wall, whispering, "Please do come forward," looking at the girls, who were stunned. "Delighted to meet you both." Facing Nanny, and here is the baby unicorn. Facing Nanny, asking, "Has Father Whitebeard arrived?" When suddenly they heard tinkling bells passing overhead. Nanny smiled. "I think we'll take it he's just arrived. I'll go to greet him, Mrs. Mable," she said as she rushed out of the stable. Mrs. Mable whispered to Lily and Amelia, "Would you like to stroke him?" They excitedly nodded as they quietly stepped forward. "You have to be very gentle, as he has only just arrived." Looking at her watch, "Exactly 10 minutes and 30 seconds ago," she said, smiling. The girls gently stroked the baby unicorn's head as he began to purr, with his little nostrils flaring. Then he cuddled into the girls' small hands. His mother stood by his side, smiling with the biggest twinkling blue eyes. Clearly a very proud mother. Mrs. Mable stroked her mane. "You have done amazingly, my dear Aqua. You should rest." The mother unicorn nodded as several fairiettes flew in. One of them flying eye level to Mrs. Mable, she whispered something into her ear. Mrs. Mable nodded, saying, "Very well, I will leave you in charge. Make sure Aqua gets adequate rest." Then she looked at the girls, saying, "Come this way. The fairiettes have arrived to tend to them. Now, shall we go and meet Father Whitebeard?" Amelia almost let out "Yippee!" although she remembered not to frighten the baby unicorn. They tiptoed out of the stable and couldn't believe their eyes. Lily looked at Mrs. Mable. "It's snowing!" clearly surprised to see a blanket of crystal white snow covering the lawn. Amelia ran onto the lawn quickly, followed by Lily. They lunged forward and began to make snow angels, giggling and laughing. Mrs. Mable chuckled and was delighted to see the girls having a fun time, saying, "Shall we make a snowman?" Amelia's little hands were red with the cold. She looked at Mrs. Mable. "My hands are too cold to make a snowman," she said. Mrs. Mable waved her cane and suddenly on popped gloves, scarf and a hat. She leant forward towards Amelia, saying, "Now you can make a snowman." Waving her cane again at Lily, although it didn't quite work the way she'd expected. Amelia laughed, pointing her little finger to her sister's hat. "That hat looks funny," she said. Lily tilted her head. "Why, what's wrong with it?" she asked. Mrs. Mable waved her cane again. "It appears my cane is being a little playful today," looking at her cane. Lily chuckled as she removed the hat, saying, "Oh!" And there is Lily with her unusual hat. It looks like a pine cone with ear flaps, like small branches of pine needles. Suddenly it changed again and again and again. Mrs. Mable cleared her throat, looking sternly at her cane, saying, "Now stop that canably." The cheeky cane was being mischievous and blew her a strawberry, sticking its tongue out and making a noise like a fart. Oh! Mrs. Mable was stunned. "Well, I never," she said. As she tapped her cane with her finger, she chastised, "Do you want me to change you into a wooden peg and put you on the line?" Staring deeply at her cane. The girls rolled around in the snow, holding their stomachs, laughing. Mrs. Mable remembered her cane always became playful when Father Whitebeard visited. She looked at it, clearing her throat again, saying, "Kiddly, diddly, kiddly bop. This playful cane must now stop." Then she tapped it 3 times, 1, 2, 3, and it returned to normal. In the distance there was an echo. "Ho, ho, ho, ho!" as Father Whitebeard approached, bellowing, "Good day to you all." He strode over, hugging Mrs. Mable, then knelt down in front of the girls, who were wide-eyed and open-mouthed. Laughing, he said, "Ho, ho, ho, ho! I see the cat has caught your tongues, my dainties." Smiling, he went inside his pocket and pulled out 2 giant lollipops, handing each to the girls, saying, "There we go. Now shall we make the most magnificent snowman? The girls nodded with glowing cheeks from the cold as steam came from their nostrils. And there is Father Whitebeard. And where's his lollipops? There's his lollipops. Chapter 3. Mrs. Mable pointed her cane towards the girls, saying, "Lift your lollipops above your heads." She waved her cane in the air and silver ripples came from it. Then she said, "You can let them go." The lollipops suspended in the air. "Now stand back," she asked as she waved it once more, and suddenly the snow began to roll and roll and roll around the garden, getting bigger and bigger. She waved it once more, saying, "That will do," as the huge snowball stopped in front. "Now, girls, shall we make the smaller one for the head?" she said. They rolled the snowball around the garden until they couldn't move it anymore. Father Whitebeard chuckled. "By Jove, I do believe it's big enough to be the snowman's head," he said. Mrs. Mable waved her cane again, and the ball jumped from the ground straight onto the larger snowball. She waved her cane again, and suddenly a big smiling face appeared, on its head a hat, and on its hands gloves, and a scarf around its neck. Amelia jumped up and down. "That is the bestest snowman I have ever seen," she grinned. Mrs. Mable smiled, saying, "Yes, he is quite splendid, isn't he?" Waving her cane again, the snowman came to life and walked forward. Lily shouted, "Wow!" as the snowman knelt down in front of the girls. He blinked his eyes and smiled, then lay on the ground. They looked at Mrs. Mable, confused. She smiled, saying, "Look, he wants to take you sledging around the grounds." His tummy dipped, and there inside were seats like on a log flume. Nanny approached, wearing a winter coat, hat, gloves, and boots, saying, "Right, my dears, hop in, and we shall go and see some of the sights around the castle grounds," looking at Mrs. Mable as the girls jumped into the snowman sledge. "Are we allowed to visit the Magical Woodland over yonder?" she asked. Mrs. Mable nodded. "Certainly, although do stay to the paths." Amelia wore a confused expression, asking, "Are you not coming, Mrs. Mable?" Mrs. Mable took the suspended lollipops, handing them back to the girls. "Afraid not, my dears. I need to talk to Father Whitebeard about an urgent matter." Lily interrupted. "What urgent matter?" wearing a concerned expression. Mrs. Mable chuckled. "Not to worry, Lily. It is concerning one of our unicorns. Father Whitebeard has a unicorn sanctuary in the North Pole." Lily nodded. "Oh, okay then." Mrs. Mable straightened her coat, looking at the girls, saying, "Nanny will take good care of you." She smiled as the snowman's arms stretched out and began to paddle the snow. In no time at all they were speeding across the lawn. The girls chuckled as Nanny shouted, "Mr. Snowman, will you slow down? You're going too fast." The snowman had no ears, so he couldn't hear, and moved faster and faster towards the magical woodland. The girls laughed with excitement as Nanny gripped tight to the snow rail in front, closing her eyes, shouting, "Oh, girls, this is far too fast for my old ticker." She was beginning to feel a little queasy. As they approached the woodland, the snowman sledge moved even faster. This time the girls shouted, "Stop!" at the top of their voices as they sped past a tree. It was no use. He couldn't hear and zoomed into the woodland as fast as a jet. Amelia and Lily closed their eyes, screaming as Nanny shouted, "You stupid blooming sledge! Stop this instant! I demand you to stop!" It was no use. He couldn't hear. When suddenly there came a noise behind. It was an almighty "Nee!" and a snow rope wrapped tightly around the speeding sledge. Looking back, Lily shouted, "It's a unicorn!" The glistening pure white unicorn dug her hooves deeply into the ground, skidding some distance as the snowman's sledge slowed down and came to a halt. She shook her mane and the rope went back into her twinkling mane. As she walked towards the front of the carriage, looking angrily at the snowman's face, saying, "Did you not hear the distress from your passengers, you careless buffoon?" The snowman didn't say a word. He just blinked and blinked. Lifting his arms, he didn't know what he'd done wrong. The unicorn walked alongside the carriage, saying, "It appears your transport does not have a brain. Is he mute?" Lily realised he didn't have ears. Looking at Nanny, she said, "He doesn't have ears. He couldn't hear us shouting." Nanny straightened her hat. "Oh my, that's the problem then," she said. Amelia stood up and excitedly shouted, "We can make him some ears." They climbed down from the sledge and began to gather snow, patting it into the side of his head and shaping them into ears. Nanny said, "We need to make these extra large so he can hear clearly." So they gathered even more snow and stuck it onto the ears, reshaping them. When they finished, they all began to laugh. Because his ears were as big as an elephant's. The unicorn roared with laughter and could hardly contain herself. "That is the funniest snowman sledge I have ever had the humour to observe." Still laughing, Nanny tapped his ears with her finger, chuckling. Mr. Snowman, can you hear me?" she asked. The snowman sledge began to laugh. "That tickles," he said. Nanny asked again, "Never mind that. Can you hear me?" she asked again. The snowman lifted his head, nodding. "I can hear a squirrel in the distant tree," he said, chuckling. His ears were very sensitive and tickled him. Nanny helped the girls into the sledge and thanked the unicorn. Let's get the next page. For her help. Her name was Snowflower. She was going to live in the North Pole with Father Whitebeard to oversee his unicorn sanctuary. They waved to Snowflower, who was still chuckling at the sight of the snowman's ears. She shook her mane, saying, Make sure they don't flap off in the wind. Watching as they made their way into the magical woodland. Chapter 4. It was amazing. The girls were bedazzled as they watched little colourful dancing fairies flying all around the woodland, and some of the strangest creatures they had ever seen. Nanny gave them a lesson in the Magical MoonEarth's natural kingdom, pointing at a furry creature suspended on a thread dangling upside down from a tree in front of the path. That, my dears, is called the Lollipops. Amelia scrunched her nose. What is that? She asked. Lily ducked her head, saying, We're going to hit it. Nanny laughed as they approached. It jumped upwards and went into the shape of a pan lid. Looking at Amelia, she said, That's why it's called that, my dears. It looks just like a pan lid. They had a fabulous afternoon riding on the snowman sledge. He kept laughing when anything touched his ears and moved slowly so they could enjoy the sights. When they arrived back at the castle, the girls were thirsty and hungry. In the foyer, they took off their coats as Mrs. Mable opened the door, saying, You're just in time for dinner. Nanny, will you be joining us? She asked. Nanny removed her hat. Oh, that would be nice, Mrs. Mable. It's been quite an ordeal today, she puffed. During dinner, the girls told Mrs. Mable how the snow sledge had no ears and so couldn't hear them screaming for him to stop. Mrs. Mable listened before saying, That sounds quite traumatic, taking a sip from her teacup. Nanny placed her teacup on the saucer. It was the most terrifying thing, Mrs. Mable. I thought we were going to hit a tree. Mrs. Mable smiled. It's good Sunflower was in the area and able to assist. Lily put her fork on her plate. She's an amazing unicorn, Amelia agreed. Yeah, taking a bite from a slice of the delicious cake. Mrs. Mable looked at the girls, changing the subject, saying, I wanted to meet you both because I have a unicorn sanctuary in Runcorn, and I'm currently looking at a property in Warrington to create another. I was wondering if you two girls would be interested in looking after your very own unicorns. The girls were confused. Nanny chuckled at the expressions on their face when Lily spoke. You mean we'd be able to take them out onto Walford Park for a ride? Mrs. Mable chuckled. That is out of the question. You see, only very special people are allowed to know unicorns really exist. If everyone knew, then they would all want one, and it would cause quite a stir. Nanny smiled, saying, Mrs. Mable will create a magical woodland attached to the garden where they will live. Amelia jumped up from the chair, clapping her hands. Yeah! Looking at her older sister. Lily, we're going to have our very own unicorns, she said excitedly. Lily was still in shock, but finally managed to say, This has been the most amazing day ever. Mrs. Mable retrieved her cane, looking at her watch. Right, girls, it's time we got you back home. Lily stared, saying, Mum's going to be worried. We've been gone all day and it's dark now. She didn't give a thought to it before because they were having such a fabulous time. Mrs. Mable tapped her nose. No, she isn't. Only a few minutes have passed. Your mother is in the kitchen putting washing into the machine. She still thinks you're both in the garden. Amelia wore a confused frown. How? That is difficult to explain. Maybe when you're a little older. Come on, girls, said Mrs. Mable as they walked towards the door. The girls ran to Nanny, giving her a big hug. Thanks, Nanny, for a fab day, they said. Nanny giggled. Oh, my dears, it has been a delight, and be sure to come and visit again, she said with a smile. In no time at all, they were back in the garden waving goodbye to Mrs. Mable, who flew away into the sky on Cupid, her invisible giant unicorn. Lily and Amelia ran into the kitchen excitedly shouting, Mum, you're never going to guess what's just happened to us. Until the next journey of Lily and Amelia's unicorn adventure. The end. I hope you enjoyed my story. Good night and God bless.